Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab, how are you?
Good, you?
Good. I still
Nice.
like that intro.
It's a good intro.
It is. It
Good
works.
intro.
Fab. So we were talking a little bit online before to get ourselves ready,
Yep.
and I was talking to Fab about what I think are the top five things that influence an individual to want to become a better salesperson. And Fab was disagreeing with me a little bit. I like that. I always find it's exciting when we debate on our podcast. But Fab,
Yeah.
if I was to ask you, and I'll say five, but it can be two or three, from your experience, from what you've seen in your job, helping people operationalize sales and RevOps, what would you say? From there's a certain distance because I know you don't do sales training and I know you don't do sales coaching, but I know you talk to a lot of salespeople. And
I
I
do.
know you talk to a lot of sales VPs and a lot of sales leaders and a lot of owners.
Mhm.
What would you say in your mind, in your expertise, because I think you have more than you think on sales, are the top, let's say, if you want to name five of the top two things that you think are most, or three things, or whatever, the top things that you need to focus on to become a better salesperson?
A salesperson, like if I'm a sales leader and how to become a salesperson, I
No,
think
if you're a
ultimately,
sales leader and you're trying to help your salespeople get better, what would you focus on? And not just things that you do, but things you'd maybe suggest for them to do. What to you are the? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here. We didn't talk about it exactly like that, but I want your
this is not at all what we talked about, but it's all good.
no, but we're gonna
Um,
get there. We're gonna get there.
um, yeah, ultimately, I don't think it's up to the salesperson. I think it's the manager. I think if a sales team is struggling, it's because the manager is not doing what they need to do. Um,
Okay,
you
wow,
know,
that's big, Fat. That's big.
I think sales leaders that have success are the ones that, I mean, I know they all care, right? I don't think there's any sales leader out there that's like, yeah, whatever. But I think it's the ones that, put in the effort. They'll sit with their team, they'll coach their team, they'll try to see how the team is doing. Like, how can I get the team to be better? They'll put in effort to make that change happen. After that, whether they end up with working like end up working with someone like you and all that to help them better, craft a better sales process. But you need to kind of already have an idea of where things aren't working, right? Like, we can't fill the pipeline or we can't close, even though they don't really know how to fix it. And then that's where they can go see somebody like you. But they already generally have an idea. And I know we've talked a million shows about like, well, closing, it's more about the opening. And, but even if they don't know that, they know that that's where the issue is, or they know that this, or they're, but like, when leaders are just like, let's just give this guy 300 leads and he'll close something, like, it's like, yeah,
Okay, so
it's like, that's like kind of
what
phone
you're
book style,
saying,
right? Which is open up
yeah,
the
yeah,
phone book and call
yeah.
people.
They're throwing stuff in. So what you're saying is a big part of the success, if not most of the success, will come from a good leader. Now, let me ask you another
Yeah.
question. Are you including there when a leader decides that the people on his team aren't the right people for the fit?
If they've done what they've done if they've done what I talked about just before, right? Because
Okay.
that's, and then we see that, like, a sports analogy is perfect there. We see that in teams all the time, right? Like, whoever's in favor with the top boss keeps their job and the other ones don't, but they don't really actually know what the problem is, right? They, oh, what's the coach, so they fire the coach, or,
Yeah.
oh, it's the players, so they trade the players.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, yeah, but did you actually put in the work to figure out what was going on? Because let's face it, I mean, anybody can be good in sales, right? You just need to be able to be in the right place, the right frame of mind, and stuff like that. And obviously that's a broad statement, but if you're hiring a salesperson, it's because they've had success in the past somewhere, right? To a certain extent. Um,
Yeah, unless you're hiring someone green. Okay,
right,
so look,
fine. So there's a green, but somebody who's applying for sales jobs kind of understands that they'd potentially like them,
yes.
right? It's not like some hyper introvert that likes to hide behind the screen and write code all day. They're not applying for sales jobs, right? Like, it's just not their thing. Somebody who's applying for a sales job, even if they're green, feel that they might realize that they don't like it, but feels that they're able to like it.
Okay. So, all right. You said a few really good things there. So the first thing is the sales leaders got to know what they're doing, and we'll talk about what that means. And then you also said that most people can be good salespeople if they obviously put the time and effort into becoming better. My opinion on the second one, I want to address that first, is that I think a salesperson needs to have the desire, yes, to be a salesperson. They also need a certain amount of skill, because I've unfortunately seen a few salespeople who want but don't have the skill in some complex sales situation. So I agree
Yeah, but
with
that
you.
doesn't mean they're not a good salesperson. It just means they're not a right fit. And the sales manager
Correct.
can see you're not a right fit at that right. If I'm more impatient than like having working on deals that take 100, 506 days to close on average because they're hyper complex and they require, that's just I'm not that kind of a salesperson, right? I need something to
Yeah,
close within a month or so.
I totally agree with you. Okay, so but to me, those leaders that are good will focus on five things, and this is what I think. So they will invest their time into helping the reps invest in themselves. What do I mean by that? Like, so specific training, if it's reading books, if it's role plays, but that's investing in yourself. Okay. It's not just reading a book and saying, oh, yeah, it's great. Because we were talking about that before. And Fab says, if you're just reading a book, you don't know why you're reading it, it's not going to go anywhere. And
Yeah.
you're probably right. But if you invest in yourself, say, hey, I want to become a better salesperson. Well, I think there's three things you need to do. You need to, yes, you do need to read to absorb. You need to train. You need to role play, because if you don't role play what you learned, you're not going to absorb it. So that's number one. So that to me is part of investing in yourself, to do the training, to take the time outside of when you're actually working to make yourself better. Two, and this is all about you, is I think a good sales leader who wants his salespeople to go forward is going to have a very tailored sales process to whatever he's trying to do. So a complex company might have five different sales processes, but they should reflect the reality of what you're doing. And you should really be able to tag and organize and understand what's happening at each level of that sales process. At a high level, we've talked about this before. You've got prospecting, discovery, confirmation, presentation, and close, right? But really what's going on there is that you need to go in and figure out what happens at all those stages. What's going on? What's the buyer's journey going? What's happening to them, and what are you doing? So that to me is super important. So that's two. Three, put this in your effing CRM. Make sure your sales process lives in your CRM. And you can talk to this way more than I can. But if you get HubSpot, don't just onboard you can just onboard the sales process that's there, but take the time to customize it so it reflects your reality, so that it really becomes a sales assistant, right? And then number four is create. So number four and number one go together. Create the habits that are going to help you get better. So if you have the habit of training, the habit of role playing, the habit of being organized, the habit of properly using your CRM, that's going to help you go forward. And the last one that's kind of flaky, and you might poo-poo this one, but you've got to know your own self-motivation. You've got to understand why you work. You've got to understand why you sell. You've got to understand what you're striving for. What does it enable to you in your personal life? Let's take an extreme example. I'm an artist who wants to do these super big, expensive paintings, but I'm really good at sales and I'm not good enough as an artist yet. So I sell because I can buy my paint supplies so I can do my paintings on the weekend, because what I'm hoping is in 5 years I can live from my painting. That's your motivation. You understand it. That's okay. So that to me are the five elements of.
I think I missed one because I only have four. That's all
Oh,
good.
really? Well, number one is invest in yourself.
Yeah.
Number two is customize your sales process.
Yeah.
Number three is take that customized sales
Yeah.
process and put it in your
I
CRM.
think I'm missing four.
Yeah. Number four is create the habits that are going to link back to helping you be a better salesperson. So literally specific habits, whether it's prospecting on certain days, whether it's training on certain days, whether it's doing role plays. So whatever it is, the habit of after each call sitting down and figuring out what happened. Those are all good sales habits. And then number five is the motivation. So I don't know, what do you think of that? And to your point, the sales leader needs to drive this. He needs to help his people understand this, because if he or she doesn't, then the person's left to themselves. Some salespeople will do it upon themselves, and they'll do very well. And their sales leader is just some dude who's in the way, who whatever, and that's okay. They do well. But a good sales leader helps you in this process. That's my opinion. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh boy, what do I think? I mean, obviously, I'll I'm down with your points 2 and 3, right? The sales process, the CRM.
I
What I'll
would
say
agree.
about and I mean, obviously because that's kind of a lot of what I do, but
Yeah.
um, I really respect sales leaders that put a lot of time crafting their sales process.
Mhm.
And what I respect the most, and somebody that I've been working with, is that she really takes time to understand like also the customer's point of view, right? Because I think a lot of time
Yeah.
that's forgotten, right? Where we're like, okay, well now I'm going to do a discovery call, and then we're
Yeah.
like, but in the client's mind they've already filled the form and they've explained the problem,
Yeah.
right? And so then your sales rep is going in with a big disconnect between what the client's expecting and what they need to do, which is
Yeah.
discover or disqualify, or whatever you would label it. So I think carefully crafting it, but I think the part that I often see missing is how are we going to track whether this works or not, right? We know the general metrics like,
Yeah.
pipeline created or how long things stay in specific deal stages. And all those are really valid, metrics. But I think you need to be okay. Fine, we have a sales process and it's there and it's in place, but how are we making sure that this works, right? Like, how are we going to know that this is not working, for example? And that's often where I feel like people, like sales leaders, and granted, I know they don't have data and analytics backgrounds. That's normal. That's that's not what we're hoping they do, but that's going to be important because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is like if people make their numbers over, they're going to ask you questions. But if the sales team doesn't make their numbers, you're going to be like, "Oh, what's going on?" And they're going to be like, "I don't know." And then, so I think you need to be very clear about what's working and how we're going to determine what's working and what's not working. And I mean, the metrics that we can pull from there, like I said, are fairly standard often, like how often the deal stays there, what's the velocity, things like that. But you have to be really clear about that. And you need to study that quite actively, weekly, monthly, quarterly, depending on your sales process, like how long your sales last. So those are like kind of 3 and 4 that I've bundled. The habits we talked about a bit, in a previous show not too long ago, actually. And that's helping create habits. I think we talked a lot about that. Those are definitely key. It's your points 1 and 5 that I have a bit of a harder time.
Come on, give it to me, Fab.
um, help them improve. Yes, you're right. Like, I mean, the world's moving fast, right? We had a few weeks ago, we had a show with Alyssa about AI, which is like a big curveball that hits sales. Well, I mean, obviously, every department we're talking about sales and marketing teams in the more recent past. So you definitely need to improve. Where I kind of bug a bit is when I hear people saying, "Ah, you got to read books or you got to listen to," because not everybody learns in the same way. And when you're like, you got to read a book and you got to, you read, read Challenger Sale and read this. And if you're not reading a million books a week, like you're never going to be a good salesperson. And the people that say that are people that enjoy reading books and
Yeah, yeah,
learning from books. Right. And
yeah.
so to me, it's like helping somebody improve is objective, right? At the end of the day, it's like, what does improvement mean and stuff like that. And I think at the end of the day, it's your role as a sales leader to help them improve, right? It's not up to them to go and pick up a book and be. I guess I've seen the opposite, right? Where it's like people have picked up books and they've actually become worse, right? Because they all want to try this out and they're trying all these things out that make no sense within the reality, and it actually ended up making them worse off, right? Because then they
Well,
get all
I
frustrated.
have
Oh, my
I
leader
have
doesn't
to
want to do this.
interrupt you there because
Yeah.
you just made me realize something that I'd never thought of before. Okay, so I am that guy who says, "Oh, I love this book. It changed." And there's a few books. It made me a lot better. There's a few books that have literally changed my business life. They have
Mhm.
like they I it's like whoa, they blew my mind. But I'm someone who likes to read,
Mhm.
whether it's an audiobook or a real book. I'm someone who likes to consume content. And
Mhm.
you just said something there, and you're gonna folks, you're allowed to blast me and you're allowed to laugh at me, but it never dawned on me that some people learn differently. It was like, fuck, I don't want to read a book. It doesn't work for me that way. And you're right. The sales leader should be smart enough to key in to say, okay, this guy's not a reader, but I'm gonna help him get better, even though he's not going to read the book. And you know what? I totally respect that, Fab. And
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Because what I often say to people, I say, look, if you don't like to read, just listen to the audiobook. So
Yeah.
what I often do when I'm training people is I'll quote that book because I didn't invent this. It's content that's been written a certain way. I'll use it, but then we'll do the training and the coaching based on what I've read.
Yeah. But
And
that's what a sales leader should do, right? Like the sales leader should be the one reading
reading the
the book or
books.
finding the way or
Yeah.
whatever, so that they can then adapt, because that's their role, right? Is I'm not out there in the trenches every day calling and prospecting and qualifying, disqualifying, and stuff like that. I'm there to see what's working, what's not working. Okay, people are having a hard time qualifying. How can I get better? How can I help them get better at qualifying? It's not up to them to, hey, go read a book on qualifying. This is a great book. Like, I find that's it's almost a cop out for a sales leader, right? If you're interested, like, this is how I'm going to train you. If you're interested, here's where all these ideas come from. And if those who want to read the book and read it, or I mean, there's no movie version of sales books, but you
There's
know,
one
like,
movie. There's one movie on sales, but unfortunately, it's not showing the best elements of it. You ever seen that? Glenn Ross.
yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
I
Anyway.
know any movie about sales is always the bad part of
Yes. The
um,
good part would it would be a boring movie, right? It would be a terrible movie. You'd be sitting there listening and helping the clients, like, "Hey, there's no antagonism here. This is a boring movie."
just a monologue of some client talking about their
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um, yeah, so that's
Okay,
what I
number
would say
five.
about your point one is, like, I think it's your role as a sales leader to help them improve. You can't expect some will be more proactive and do the work that they need to do to improve. But even then, it, like I said, it can be detrimental, right? Because they're like, oh, I just read the challenger sale. This is how should do myself. Like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, like, this is not even the methodology that we're applying here. Like this, you know what I mean? Like, and then they're going off and they're doing random things. And so, um, yeah. And
Okay, but
then,
can we press pause there for a second before you go into point number five? Um, what do you do? So, Fab, what do you do? You're working for a company. You really like the product. Your boss sucks. Your manager, your sales leader sucks. You love the president. You love the VP, but you report to some Nimrod, and you want to get better. Can't you?
yeah,
You can
well, yeah,
rebuild. Can't you? Can't you make
of
yourself
course you can.
better? Okay.
Yeah, of course you can. But then the question is, like, is it the right place for you? Fine, you like the president, fine, you like the product. But if they're keeping in place a Nimrod manager, like, is self improvement probably finding a better place and a better manager
Fair enough.
elsewhere?
Fair enough. Fair
You
enough.
know, and,
Okay.
and I mean, I'm talking from experience, well, not personal experience, but I had a client that I worked with, and then when I went out on my own, the company she was working at hired me to help them with their HubSpot, and then our agreement ended, and then she reached out to me like, oh, I left the company, I'm at a new place, and we need help with our HubSpot. And we were chatting once, and I was like, how come you left? It was like seemed like a great place. She's like, yeah, it was great, but it wasn't challenging for me. I wasn't learning how to become a better salesperson. So she left, and she found a manager that allowed her to become a better salesperson, right? And so, because sometimes, yeah, if your manager's not doing that for you, you could learn all the books in the world. Like, in the end, you'll just end up more frustrated because you'll always feel like they're clipping your wings
Yeah.
somewhere.
Okay. So I think we're saying the same thing, and you're right. From a management perspective, it's your job as a sales leader to make sure you're doing everything you can to help your salespeople improve, even those that don't like to read,
Especially
or
those.
especially those that
No,
don't
but
like.
you have to understand, like, some people are practical, right? So if you
Yeah,
sit them in a room training, or even if you do role plays, it's just like it's not connecting with them. They need to be on the phone and try it out, and then you need to like listen into their phone calls, like their recordings, and like,
I have
hey,
the perfect example of that. I'm dealing with a client right now, and one of the salespeople is comes from a different background and is having a little bit of a hard time doing cold calls. But the sales manager is doing a great job because he's doing a lot of role plays with this person to make sure that they're absorbing. And we talk about high level concepts, but it's hard for this person to convert that into action. So the sales manager is absorbing that high level content and turning into a package that salesperson can use. So that's a perfect example. So
yeah.
yeah,
And
we
I could
learned it.
argue,
We agree.
I could argue that, like, sales people are probably much more practical in general, right? Like, obviously everybody's different, but but that's it. You can't just assume that
Oh, you
sitting in a
mean
classroom.
tactical rather than you mean tactical rather than concept? You mean more into
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, even I mean, I know you like reading, and you said you like reading, but I know your backstory and that you went into sales, you didn't like school or whatever it was, and you
I
just
did
figured it
like,
was
no, I liked school. I didn't want to work when I graduated.
okay. Fine, that's what I meant. But then this is something that you could do, and you could talk to people, and you can, and so. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's like if you're expecting your reps to self improve, like I mean, you've already failed to start with because you're going to end up with a very strong team, a weak
Yeah,
team. You're going to have strong players that are going to shoot themselves in the foot.
yeah,
It's your
yeah.
responsibility. Crafting the sales process, I gave my point of view, which is taking into account the client. Make so your CRM. One point that I realized that I forgot to mention is like adding it to your CRM too, but making sure it's usable. Right? I've seen a lot of people that no, but I mean we seem as straightforward. But I mean, I was talking to
Oh no, I
somebody.
don't think it's great. No, no, sorry. I don't think it's straightforward at all. I think
Right?
one of the most complicated things is to take that great sales process you have and make it usable in your CRM. No, no, no. I'm not belittling that. I'm saying that is the most.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the reasons you have a good job and you're good at it is because you help people understand that sales process and turn it into something that they can use. So it's a sales assistant rather than the jambalaya of bullshit that doesn't help anybody, right? So
Yeah.
no, I totally
No,
agree with you. Totally
because I've
agree with you.
seen like there's like 67 fields to fill out a different
Yeah,
part. And it's like it's not usable. Like it's not helping anybody. And I realize it's not. It's not. There's no science behind it. There's an art behind it, and because every team is different, every company is different. Some teams are very data process and very process driven, and for them it helps. They hire salespeople that are like that, and it helps them to have 67 fields to fill out at each stage of the process. It helps the reps figure out where they're at, especially in complex sales. Others are like, ah man, it's got to go fast, it's got to go quick, and then yeah, but then why are you asking them to fill out all these things, right? But then
yeah,
oh, you're collecting the data. Okay, well let's find another way to collect the data,
yeah.
and so on. So I'll say that about that point. The habits, yeah, habits,
Talk about
obviously.
Yeah, we covered habits. I think we
Yeah,
did a whole podcast on it, and I think we agreed. I know you go to the gym. I know you're
I
disciplined.
know you got.
Like that.
So the understanding their motivation is important. Obviously, I think somebody needs to, you need to be motivated to have success. I think it's just more complex than somebody who's motivated for external factors is maybe a little easier. Like you were saying before, like I'm this, but I can't. Being in sales allows me to do that. I think a lot of people it takes more than just a sales manager to help you figure out your why in a lot of or I call it figuring out your why, but figuring out your motivation. I think
I don't think your sales manager. I think your sales manager can encourage you to figure out your why, but I think I think that's a journey you got to take on your own. You know, if you need if you need a psychologist to help you out or whatever, but you
yeah,
definitely have to know you should know what your why is. You should know what you're trying to achieve.
yeah. I think a lot of people have just and if I think back of like salespeople that have had success, like today, would they really know what their why or what their motivation was? I think they were just like in the right jive. It's just jive for them, and it's just a good to me, like people, and there's a lot of research on this, like people strive when they have like, when they're properly challenged, when they're allowed to grow and improve, and I think, I don't know if you necessarily need to have like, I need to make this succeed, because blah, blah, blah. I think you just need to provide an environment that, according to research, uh, favors employee engagement, right? Which is like
Yeah, and look,
the
Bob,
economy, the stuff like that.
and I don't disagree with you that if this is done improperly, it becomes badly applied psychology. And Fab knows about psychology. We've talked about this before. His wife's a psychologist, so um, and I agree, and I really don't disagree with you. What I'm saying is, as an individual, so let's talk about the individual. As a sales individual, understanding what you're working for helps you create better habits to get somewhere. And I know it's very simple. It's very first level. I'm not talking about someone who's trying to go deep dive into psychoanalysis to understand their motivation. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying if you're someone at a very high level who knows that, they're trying to get so many RSPs, they're trying to pay off their house, they're trying to put money aside for their children's education, things that require money, things that require time. If you're trying to put money away so you have more time to do things you want at that first level, if you understand that motivation, a lot of people don't make that connection. I know it sounds stupid. And I see that if you can write those down, it helps you in a very first level tactical way. And I'm not talking at all about the psychology of the individuals or the characters or the in-depth analysis. I don't pretend to go there. I mean, that's the job of a psychologist to go there. But if you as a sales leader understands that your individual salespeople's whys are what drive them to do anything, then you're already a step ahead of the game. And if you converse with them and discover those, if you help people, remind them, and I'll give you a very basic, simple example. It's October 29th. It's dreary and rainy outside, and your salesperson's a little bit not in the mood. And you've talked to them, and a couple of weeks ago they talked to you about this great trip they want to go on with their family, whatever. You remind them of the trip, and you say, "Hey, look, Paul, that doing this prospecting, you told me that if you talk to this many clients, blah blah blah." It's just going to help move it because it's the rep that's told you this, and that's where. And I'm not talking about pop psychology here or pressing a magic button. It's just understanding what drives your team. If it's that guy who wants a fishing boat, or that girl who wants a fishing boat, or that guy that wants to go on a trip around the world, whatever it might be, you understanding that, you first of all connect with that individual, and you've taken the time to get to know them, and you're going to work with them to try to help them achieve that goal. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like if they have a goal, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily have, a lot of the examples you gave were very extrinsic, like
Yeah, they are.
trips and trips and savings and private schools or whatever. And that's part of it. I think I'm just saying, like, just people are more, there's more to them, and right, they might want that trip, but at the end of the day, they're still coming in jury, and you can remind them, like, but I don't know. To me, it's just like being aware of what they're hoping for and what their yes is critical. But I guess my challenge is like, like you were saying, like you can't just really motivate somebody. They need to define their own motivation, and but understanding what's important to them is critical. I don't know how much at the end of the day it'll help them. We all have ups and downs, and we have shitty days sometimes, and we call a million people and everybody hangs up on us. Like it's going to be hard, no matter how aware we are of our goals, right? Like,
no, for sure, that's true. I mean, you're going to have a bad day no matter what. But I would like to say something, and I think if you're in sales, ultimately your numbers count. That data is going to count. And if the numbers count, usually it's dollars. And usually if you're in sales and you're not into dollars, there's probably something that's not going to go well eventually. I don't know many. I'm not saying it's all they think about, but ultimately, most of the successful salespeople I know have and I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but have a desire to earn dollars.
Yeah, but that's where you have to watch out because, and again, obviously every industry is different, but I've obviously worked with reps like that as well, and empirically, because I don't have like data that in front of me, but they a lot of times saw that they don't always bring in the right clients, right? They just want to close somebody so they can make those dollars, and so it could be great, especially in businesses where it's kind of like a one sale. There's no upsell potential, no renewal potential. It's just like, okay, fine. But, I also work with a lot of tech companies where renewals and upsells are everything because they make their money more on the back end, like, after a renewal or two type of thing. And so if they're bringing in a lot of upfront clients that aren't renewing, so again, it's understanding how that motivation works within the organization.
I think that's a whole other podcast because you also have to your remuneration has to drive proper behavior. So what you're talking about there if they're just bringing stuff to bring it in to make cash and it doesn't help the company and it doesn't help the client, well, then there's something wrong with the way you're rewarding people. And we
Yeah.
can have a whole debate. I think we could spend 5 podcasts just talking about commission and non-commission salespeople. You know,
We should do that.
in my in my experience, properly remunerated bonuses and commission go a long way to drive the proper behavior. But anyway, so there are the 5 points, and thanks for covering. Now, I want to come back to something you said earlier, which I think is really important. So when I'm talking to salespeople or sales manager or anybody, I say there's two things. There's your activity, and there's your method. So what you say and how you say it and how often you say it and how so basically, if you really simplify it, how often you open your mouth or you write something, and what you say when you open your mouth or you write something. That's it. But there's a third element that you're talking about, which is so important. And I don't talk to reps this much about it, but I should talk to leaders more about it. It's the data you accumulate. Because
Mhm.
if you're looking at your activity and your method, and in the end, you're getting all these results, that's your data. Well, look at your data to then decide, of course, how you're going to adjust your activity and your method. So those three work together in a circle, right? So data, activity, method, and you're always, well, one of them is passive. Data is passive because it's being fed by what's happening by results. But you can adjust very much what your activity and your method is if you're collecting data. So, and if you're doing it properly in a CRM, it's amazing. Hey, we tried this whole new strategy last month or the last 3 months or last 6 months, and we saw that our sales stayed the same, and we're putting in 50% more effort. Well, data is telling you should do something differently. So that's one
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. Like even though I am a HubSpot consultant and CRMs and all that stuff, I too sometimes don't challenge my clients enough to put numbers behind different initiatives and like, hey, we want to do this, and and I get them. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated, but definitely the ones that have had the most success are are the ones that have a clear enough idea of what they're trying to achieve with something. And I get that sometimes like you could look at it and like my sales process doesn't make sense. Like this stage doesn't make sense. And, is it going to impact revenue by that much at the end of the day? Sometimes removing a stage just helps salespeople, right? Like it's not necessarily going to impact your revenue at the end of the day, but it's going to make it's going to remove a bit of eye rolling in the room, right? When you're training people or whatever, or some so I understand that data is not always black and white, or it's not always even easy to achieve. But I think you need to have a clear idea of why you're implementing something,
Yeah.
and if you can track it, that's the best, right? Like if you can really be able to go back and be like, okay, here's my new process, because we're talking about sales processes, but it works for anything. Like here's my new sales process, and here's how we're going to track it. Like our current velocity is X. Deals spend X much time in the sales process, because if you're changing your stages, maybe per stage doesn't matter. And here are kind of the metrics that we feel are going to be important, because this is what impacts how much revenue we can get and how quickly we can get it, type of thing, hypothetically. Um, then you have a clear idea, because then you could go back with somebody like you or your boss or whoever, not Paul's boss, but but like your CEO or your co-founder, and be like, hey, check it out, we rolled out this new sales process 6 months ago, and look, like our velocity went up, our our time in sales, in the sales pipeline, diminished. This is great. How can we improve it further?
Yep.
And I
Yep.
understand most salespeople don't have that background, right? A lot of sales managers are good salespeople, and we're not data people to start with. So if that's
That's where
not your
you come in to
strength,
help them. That's where you come in to help them establish data that'll help them. Because you're right. A lot of sales managers are old salespeople who are not. They like data, but they might not have the mind or the capacity to do that. And that's where someone like you can really help them establish a process or a way of accumulating data that can be useful for them to help their salespeople have success.
yeah, yeah. And I'll always remember. In the end, they never ended up working together long term. But I was looking at somebody's sales pipeline in HubSpot, and they had this. And I know we talked about this in the past, so that's why I'm remembering it. But they had this dormant stage, right? Like where deals would kind of like, well, they didn't say no, so they're not lost. And I looked and I like it was something like 60% of the value of the pipeline was in that stage, and I'm like, and I told them like, I'm pretty sure your rep are using this stage to not lose deals, and it's falsifying all your forecasts and
Yeah.
they ended up removing it, and they're like, oh my gosh, our results are so much clearer now, right? And so that's the type of thing that data can help you identify. Because putting out a new sales process or a new prospecting methodology, or for marketing a new nurture workflow, yeah, it all looks good because you wrote it and it looks nice, but is it really helping move the needle at the end of the day
Yeah.
is what's important. And if you don't have time to think about it or to track that, then maybe it's not worth rolling out at this moment,
Yep.
right? It's maybe better to sleep, well, not for you because that's extra revenue, but to sleep on the new sales process for 6 months, the time that you have maybe a new sales ops person come in and help you implement it, and to
No,
try to
no.
do it. Yeah.
Listen, I don't think you should rush into any changes without understanding what you're trying to achieve, and take a look at it and understand it. But some people don't even have a real sales process.
No,
That's
no, I
where,
get that.
and your sales process should be built from the best practices that you have, from analyzing how you've best made things move forward to really bring it to the next level.
Yeah.
So hey, let's wrap this one up, Fab.
I know we ended up talking a lot longer than I thought we would for
I, I,
a
I
topic
knew
that
I
was
knew we would talk a long time. I knew it. I was no doubt in my mind.
cool. Yeah, so I guess the initial topic was like how to help as a sales leader, how to help your team become better.
Yep.
And the 5 things that we talked about are helping them improve. My point was that you need to set an environment that helps them improve,
Yep.
and not
Yep.
just literally throw the book at them.
I agree.
Craft a sales process. Make your CRM usable.
Yep.
Obviously, adding your sales process within
Hmm.
the CRM, but making HubSpot usable. Help create healthy habits, right?
Yep.
And we have a whole show about that, so go check
Yep.
out that show. And I wrote it down as be aware of what motivates them. I'm still on the fence as to
Yeah.
how you can use
Yeah.
them.
No, you
Use
should
that.
definitely. Yeah, you can't listen very quickly. You can't motivate someone, but be aware of know your people.
Yeah.
Well, know your people. Know, like, what your kids like. You know what your mom likes. You know what your friends like. You should know what your reps like. You
Yeah.
shouldn't be like, I have no clue what you're interested in, but go do this. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
that's good. And which ties in a bit all over the place, but mainly in the CRM part is uh, have a way to measure success, right? Like use
yeah.
the data, right? Like it's not just about adding your sales process. It's how do you determine whether
Yep.
it's working or not.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. Well, that's great. Thanks, Fab. I like
Awesome.
the way you summarize things too. You're so thorough.
All right. Take care.
See you
Talk to you
later, everyone.
soon.
Thank you. Bye
Bye.
bye.